The interview room was white. Everything was white. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, even the table between them. Vel hated white. It reminded him of snow. Snow reminded him of Vorn 4, and Vorn 4 reminded him of things he had spent 40 years trying to forget. He sat in his chair and looked at his 4 hands. 2 of them shook from age. He was 312 cycles old now, ancient even by Torani standards. But the other 2 hands shook from something else. They shook from memory. Across the table sat a young female Torani named Kira. She was barely 60 cycles old, still bright-eyed and curious about the universe. She held a recording device in her lower right hand and a tablet in her upper left. She was a journalist, she had told him. She worked for the Galactic Archive. She wanted to document the stories of veterans before they all died. Vel almost laughed at that. Die. Yes, he would die soon. But the memories would not die with him. They would live forever in his dreams, in his scars, in the way he still checked corners before entering rooms. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me, Kira said. Her voice was soft and professional. The archive believes it is important to preserve first-hand accounts of the Human Coalition War. Vel said nothing for a long moment. He simply stared at her young face and wondered if she truly understood what she was asking. She wanted him to remember. She wanted him to go back to that frozen hell and live through it again. You are too young, he finally said. You do not know what you are asking. Kira leaned forward slightly. That is exactly why I'm asking. My generation grew up after the war. We only know humans from trade agreements and diplomatic functions. We see them as partners, allies. But the older generations, she paused, they look at humans differently. There is fear in their eyes. I want to understand why. Fear. Yes, that was the right word. Vel had felt many things in his long life. Joy, sadness, anger, love. But he had never felt true fear until he met humanity. Do you know what we called humans before the war? Vel asked. Kira shook her head. We called them the soft species, the prey species playing at predator. Vel let out a bitter laugh. They had no claws, no fangs, no natural armor. They could not see in the dark like the Vorics. They could not breathe underwater like the Kalani. They lived barely 100 of their years, which is nothing compared to our lifespans. Their world was not even particularly dangerous by galactic standards. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. The Coalition's War Council looked at all this information and made a decision. They decided that humans would be easy to defeat. They decided that we would conquer Earth in one cycle and add another species to our territory. What happened? Kira asked quietly. Vel opened his eyes and looked directly at her. We learned that we had made a terrible mistake. We learned that all our information was correct, but our understanding was completely wrong. Yes, humans were soft. Yes, they were short-lived. Yes, they had no natural weapons. He paused. But none of that mattered. Because humans had something we did not understand, something we could not measure with our scanners or calculate with our computers. What was that? Vel was quiet for a long moment. Then he slowly pulled back the sleeve on his upper left arm. Kira's eyes went wide. 3 deep scars ran from his elbow to his wrist. The wounds had healed long ago. But the marks remained. They were ugly and jagged. The kind of scars that came from desperate violence. These, Vel said, came from a single human. A female. She weighed perhaps half my mass. When I fought her, she had already been shot twice. She was missing 3 fingers on her right hand. She had been fighting for 6 hours without rest. He traced one of the scars with his lower right hand. She still almost killed me. I had to break her arm to stop her. And even then, even with a broken arm and bullet wounds and missing fingers, she tried to bite my throat out. He looked up at Kira. Do you understand? She was dying. She knew she was dying, but she refused to stop fighting. Kira had stopped taking notes. She simply stared at him with wide eyes. That is what humans are. Vel continued. They are not strong. They are not fast. They do not have special powers or advanced technology. But they have something else. They have a will that does not break. They have a fire inside them that burns even when everything else has gone dark. He pulled his sleeve back down and placed all 4 hands on the table. I agreed to this interview because the young generation needs to understand. You need to know why, even 40 years after the war ended, no species in the galaxy dares to threaten Earth. You need to know why the mere mention of human soldiers makes veteran warriors wake up screaming in the night. Kira swallowed hard. Will you tell me everything? I will tell you about Vorn 4, Vel said. I will tell you about the Battle of the Frozen Hell, where 12,000 coalition soldiers went to conquer 400 humans. I will tell you what we found there, and I will tell you why I still cannot sleep when it snows. He took a deep breath and felt the old memories rising up like ghosts from a grave. 40 years. It had been 40 years. But when he closed his eyes, he could still see the snow. He could still hear the screams. He could still smell the blood freezing on the ice. We thought we were going to war, Vel said quietly. We were wrong. We were walking into a nightmare, and by the time we realized our mistake, it was already too late. Kira activated her recording device and set it on the table between them. The small light blinked red, capturing every word. I am ready, she said. Please, start from the beginning. Vel nodded slowly. The beginning. Yes. He remembered the beginning very well. He remembered standing on the transport ship, looking down at the white surface of Vorn 4. He remembered feeling confident, excited, even. He remembered thinking that this would be an easy victory. He had been so young then, so foolish. The beginning, he repeated. Very well. Let me tell you about the first time I saw a human. Let me tell you about Captain Tae-ho, the man who taught me what fear truly means. He closed his eyes and let the memories take him back. Back to the snow. Back to the cold. Back to the place where he had lost his innocence and found something far worse in its place. The truth about humanity. Vel remembered the day he arrived on Vorn 4. He was barely 80 cycles old, young and stupid, and eager to prove himself. The transport ship carried 500 soldiers from his unit, and they were all talking about how quickly they would finish this mission. 400 humans, his friend Dax had said, laughing. We have 12,000 soldiers. This will be over in 2 days. Commander Lorne had told them the same thing during the briefing. The humans had a small mining colony on Vorn 4. They had no military base, no heavy weapons, no warships in orbit, just 400 colonists with basic weapons and a few small buildings. We will land. We will overwhelm them with numbers, and we will claim this planet for the coalition, Commander Lorne had announced. This is not a battle. This is a cleanup operation. Everyone had cheered. Vel had cheered too. He had been so excited to prove himself in his first real mission. That excitement died on the first day. The coalition forces landed in perfect formation, exactly as their training demanded. 12,000 soldiers arranged in neat lines, moving across the frozen landscape toward the human settlement. The snow was thick, and the wind was cold, but Vel did not mind. His species could handle low temperatures well enough. They marched for 3 hours. They saw nothing. No humans. No defenses. No resistance. Then the killing started. Vel never saw where the first shot came from. He only heard the sound. A sharp crack that echoed across the empty white landscape. Then, the soldier next to him fell. Just fell, like someone had cut his strings. There was a hole in his head that had not been there a moment before. For one long second, nobody moved. Nobody understood what had happened. Then more shots came. Crack, crack, crack. Soldiers fell left and right. The neat formations became chaos as everyone tried to find cover in a landscape that had no cover at all. Where are they? Someone screamed. I cannot see them. Nobody could see them. The humans were ghosts. They fired from positions so far away that Vel could not even see the muzzle flashes. They fired from under the snow, from inside ice formations, from places that should have been impossible. The coalition forces tried to advance. They lost 200 soldiers in the first hour. They tried to retreat. They lost another 100. By the end of the first day, the cleanup operation had become a disaster. And they had not even seen a single human. Vel told Kira about the days that followed. The coalition commanders kept sending troops forward, kept trying to overwhelm the humans with numbers. And every day, more soldiers died. The humans did not fight like any enemy the coalition had ever faced. They did not stand in lines and exchange fire. They did not try to hold territory. Instead, they appeared from nowhere, killed as many coalition soldiers as possible, and then vanished before anyone could respond. Supply lines were attacked in the night. Ammunition disappeared. Food was poisoned. Communication equipment was destroyed. Every morning, the coalition forces woke up weaker than the day before. We started calling them shadows, Vel said. Because that is what they were. Shadows that killed. It was on the 8th day that Vel first saw Captain Teho. Vel had been assigned to a scouting unit, trying to find the main human position. They moved carefully through a frozen valley, checking every rock and every ice formation. The wind was howling and the snow was falling thick, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Then Vel saw him, a figure standing on a ridge above them. Completely still, completely alone. The blizzard swirled around him, but he did not move. He did not try to hide. He simply stood there, watching. Vel raised his scope and looked at the figure. It was a human male. Average height for their species. Average build. He wore white clothing that blended with the snow. But he made no effort to conceal himself. He had a weapon in his hands, but he was not aiming it. He was just watching. "What is he doing?" Vel whispered to his squad leader. "I do not know," the squad leader replied. "Take the shot." Vel aimed his weapon. The human was an easy target, but something made Vel hesitate. The human was not afraid. He was standing in the open, surrounded by enemies, and he showed no fear at all. His face was calm, patient, like he was waiting for something. Vel fired. The shot missed. The wind had pushed it off course, or the human had moved at the last instant. Vel could not tell which, and then the human smiled. Vel saw that smile through his scope. It was not a cruel smile or a mocking smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something you did not. The smile of a predator watching prey walk into a trap. The ground exploded. Vel learned later that the humans had buried explosives throughout the valley. They had watched the coalition forces search for hours, mapping their movements, waiting for the perfect moment. When enough soldiers were in the kill zone, they set off the bombs. Vel survived because he was near the edge of the valley. Most of his unit was not so lucky. He lay in the snow, ears ringing, body burning from shrapnel wounds. Through the smoke and fire, he saw the human on the ridge, Captain Teho. Though Vel did not know his name yet, the man was still standing there, still watching, still smiling. Then he turned and walked away into the blizzard. That was when I learned the first truth about humans, Vel told Kira. They did not fight to win battles. They fought to make us pay for every inch of ground. They did not care about holding territory or claiming victory. They only cared about making us bleed. He paused and took a drink of water. His throat was dry from talking so much, from remembering so much. On the 14th day, my unit found a human outpost. A small building, half buried in snow. We were so excited. Finally, we had found something. Finally, we could fight back. Vel closed his eyes. He could still see it so clearly. 300 soldiers surrounding a tiny building. Officers giving orders. Everyone certain that this was the turning point. We breached the walls and stormed inside. We found nothing. Empty rooms. Empty halls. No humans. No equipment. Nothing. He opened his eyes and looked at Kira. Except for a small device on a table in the center room. A recording device. When we entered, it activated automatically. "Flive." "What did it say?" Kira asked. Vel let out a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. It was a human female, Sergeant Yuna, we later learned. She was smiling in the recording. Cheerful, even. She said hello. She said she was sorry she could not be there to greet us in person. And then she said we were standing on top of 200 kilograms of high explosives. He held up two of his hands. I lost these two and had them regrown. I was one of 11 survivors from a unit of 300 soldiers. The room was silent. Kira had stopped breathing. That is what humans are, Vel said quietly. They do not just fight. They make you afraid of every step you take. They make you afraid of every building you enter. They make you afraid of the very ground beneath your feet. He leaned forward and looked into Kira's eyes. And that was only the beginning. We still had the tunnels to face. We still had the ghost. We still had so much horror ahead of us. Kira swallowed hard. Please, she said. Continue. Vel nodded slowly. The memories were coming faster now, darker, more painful. But he had promised to tell her everything, and he would keep that promise, no matter how much it hurt. After 2 weeks of dying on the surface, the coalition commanders made a decision. They would go underground. The mining tunnels beneath Vorn 4 stretched for hundreds of kilometers. The commanders believed the confined spaces would take away the humans' advantages. No more long-range shots, no more hidden explosives, no more disappearing into blizzards. Vel remembered thinking this was a good idea. He was so young then. So stupid. The tunnels were worse. So much worse. Above ground, the humans had been ghosts. Underground, they became something else entirely. They became monsters in the dark. Vel told Kira about the first time his unit entered the tunnels. They moved in a tight formation, weapons raised, lights mounted on their helmets cutting through the blackness. The air was cold and thin, the walls pressed in from all sides. Every sound echoed and multiplied until it was impossible to tell where anything was coming from. They walked for an hour without incident. Then their point soldier died. There was no warning, no sound. One moment he was walking, the next moment he was falling, a knife buried in his throat. The attack came from above. A human had been clinging to the ceiling, perfectly still, perfectly silent, waiting for them to pass beneath. By the time anyone raised their weapons, the human was gone. Vanished into a side tunnel that nobody had noticed. This happened again and again. Soldiers died, to knives, to bullets, to traps that sprang from the walls and floor. The humans seemed to know every tunnel, every passage, every hiding spot. They struck without warning and disappeared without a trace. We started calling one of them the Ghost, Vel said. Lieutenant Hana. We never saw her face. We only saw the results of her work. He held up his hand and showed 3 fingers. She killed 47 coalition soldiers over 6 days. All confirmed kills. There were probably more that we never found. He lowered his hand. She was a sniper. But in those tunnels, she was something more. She was fear given form. Vel's unit would find bodies in places they had already cleared. They would lose soldiers in areas that should have been safe. They would hear whispers in the dark, just on the edge of hearing. Sometimes a laugh, sometimes a single word in the human language. What word? Kira asked. Bang, Vel said. Just that one word. Bang. And then someone would die. The coalition forces brought in more soldiers. They brought in heavy weapons. They tried to flood the tunnels with gas. Nothing worked. The humans knew those tunnels better than anyone. They had backup routes, hidden rooms, secret passages. For every tunnel the coalition blocked, the humans found 3 more. But the killing was not what truly broke Vel. He had seen death before. He would see much more death before the war ended. What broke him was something else. What broke him was the humans who did not die. We captured a small group of them, Vel told Kira. 7 soldiers. They had been cut off from their main force and surrounded. We thought they would surrender. We thought they would be happy to stop fighting. He shook his head slowly. They were not happy. They fought until they ran out of ammunition. Then they fought with knives. Then they fought with their hands. We had to knock them unconscious to stop them from fighting. Among the captured humans was a man named Hyun Woo. He was young by human standards, perhaps 25 of their years. He was not particularly large or strong, but when the coalition medics examined him, they found something that made everyone stop and stare. His left arm was broken. Not just fractured, but completely broken. The bone was visible through the skin. The wound was infected and swollen. "How old is this injury?" the medic asked through a translator. Hyun-woo smiled. It was a tired smile, but there was no pain in it. 3 days, he said. 3 days. He had been fighting for 3 days with a bone sticking out of his arm. When the medics looked closer, they found that he had set the bone himself using a rifle stock and some cloth torn from his uniform. Then he had continued fighting with his other arm. "Why did you not surrender?" Vel asked him. He could not understand. The pain must have been incredible. The infection could have killed him. Why would anyone keep fighting in that condition? Hyun-woo looked at him for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was not a mocking laugh. It was an honest laugh. Like Vel had asked a funny question. "We do not stop until we are dead," Hyun-woo said. Sometimes not even then. Vel did not understand what that meant. Not then. He would understand later. But the human who truly haunted Vel was not Hyun-woo. It was another prisoner. A medic named Seung-ho. Seung-ho had been captured while trying to recover wounded humans from a collapsed tunnel. He had crawled through rubble for hours, digging through rock with his bare hands, trying to reach his injured comrades. By the time the coalition forces found him, his hands were bleeding and broken. But he was still digging. They brought him to the prisoner holding area. They treated his wounds and put him in a cell with the other captured humans. He did not resist. He did not fight. He simply sat in the corner and watched. 2 days later, a young Torani soldier was brought into the medical area. He had been injured in a tunnel collapse. His wounds had become infected, and the infection was spreading. The coalition medics did not know how to treat it. They did not have the right medicine. The young soldier was dying. Seung-ho watched the medics work. He watched them fail, and then he did something that Vel would never forget. He walked to the edge of his cell and called out to the medics. He told them they were using the wrong treatment. He told them the infection was a specific type that needed a specific approach. He talked them through every step, explaining what to do and how to do it. The medics hesitated. This was an enemy. Why would he help them? But the young soldier was dying. They had no other options. So they listened. Seung-ho talked for an hour, guiding them through the treatment. He answered every question. He corrected every mistake. He was patient and calm and thorough. The young soldier survived. Later, one of the medics asked Seung-ho why he had helped. He was a prisoner of war. The young soldier was his enemy. Why would he save an enemy's life? Seung-ho looked at the medic with a strange expression. It was confusion, Vel realized later. The human was confused by the question. He was hurt, Seung-ho said simply. I am a medic. That was all. No complicated explanation, no hidden agenda. The young soldier was hurt, and Seung-ho was a medic. So Seung-ho helped him. It was that simple. Vel sat with Kira in the white interview room and felt the old confusion rising up inside him again. 40 years later. And he still did not understand. That is the true horror of humans, he said quietly. They are not monsters. Monsters would be easier to understand. Monsters are simple. They want to kill, so they kill. You can predict them. You can prepare for them. He leaned forward. But humans are not simple. Hyun-woo would fight for 3 days with a broken arm. He would kill without hesitation. But Seung-ho would save an enemy's life without asking for anything in return. The same species, the same soldiers. How can that be? Kira shook her head. She had no answer. Pain is not a weakness to them, Vel continued. It is fuel. They take their pain and they turn it into strength. But kindness is not a weakness either. They can be kind and brutal at the same time. They can save you and kill you in the same breath. He sat back in his chair and looked at the white walls. White like snow. White like Vorn 4. That is what I learned in those tunnels, he said. I learned that humans are not one thing. They are everything. And that is what makes them so terrifying. You never know which human you will meet. The healer or the killer. The friend or the enemy. He closed his eyes. Sometimes, they do not even know themselves. Kira was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question Vel knew was coming. What happened next? Vel opened his eyes. The next part was the worst part. The final assault. The bombing. The 43 humans who survived what should have been total destruction. Next, he said slowly. We learned what happens when you push humans to the breaking point. We learned that they do not break. They just become something worse. He took a deep breath. The memories were waiting. Patient. Hungry. Ready to consume him once more. Let me tell you about the end of Vorn 4, he said. Let me tell you about the day the sky burned. 1 month. The coalition had expected the battle to last 2 days. It lasted 1 month, and by the end of that month, the coalition commanders were desperate. 12,000 soldiers had landed on Vorn 4. 7,000 were dead. Another 2,000 were wounded. The remaining 3,000 were exhausted, terrified, and barely functional. Morale had collapsed completely. Soldiers refused to enter the tunnels. They refused to walk through open snow. They saw humans everywhere, even in their dreams, and the worst part was that nobody knew how many humans were left. Intelligence estimates ranged from 50 to 300. Nobody could say for certain. The humans had no clear command structure that the coalition could identify. They had no supply lines to cut. They seemed to appear from nowhere and disappear into nothing. The coalition commanders held a meeting aboard their orbital station. Vel was not present, but he learned what happened later. The commanders argued for hours. Some wanted to withdraw. Some wanted to bring in more troops. Some wanted to use chemical weapons. In the end, they chose the simplest option. They chose to burn everything. The orbital bombardment began at dawn. Coalition warships positioned themselves above the human settlement and opened fire. Energy weapons, explosive projectiles, incendiary bombs. Everything they had, they fired for 6 hours straight. Vel watched from a safe distance. He stood on a ridge with the other surviving members of his unit and watched the world end. The sky turned orange. The snow melted and then evaporated. The ground cracked and split. The mining complex, the tunnels, the human settlement, everything was reduced to burning rubble. When the bombardment finally stopped, there was nothing left. Just a blackened crater where a colony used to be. Steam rose from the destroyed landscape. Fires burned in places that should have been too wet to burn. Nothing could survive that, Vel's squad leader said. Nothing. They were wrong. The coalition forces descended in transport ships. 3,000 soldiers landing in the ruins of what had been a human colony. They expected to find corpses. They expected to confirm the kill and declare victory. Instead, they found 43 humans. 43. Out of the original 400 defenders, 43 had survived. They had hidden in deep tunnels. They had found pockets of air and shelter. They had crawled through burning rubble and emerged on the other side. And they were still fighting. Vel could not believe what he was seeing. The humans should have been dead. Everything they had was destroyed. Their homes, their supplies, their friends. The ground itself had been turned to glass. And yet there they were, emerging from the smoke like demons rising from hell. Captain Tejo was alive. Vel recognized him immediately. The man who had stood on the ridge watching. The man who had smiled before the bombs went off. He was covered in burns and blood. His left arm hung useless at his side, but his eyes were still sharp. His movements were still precise. He was still dangerous. The humans did not try to hide anymore. There was nowhere left to hide. Instead, they used the destruction itself. They moved from crater to crater. They used the twisted metal and broken stone as cover. They turned the coalition's own bombing into their shield. Sergeant Yuna was alive too. The woman who had left the bomb in the outpost, who had killed 300 soldiers with a cheerful message. She had lost her left leg below the knee. Someone had tied a cloth around the stump to stop the bleeding. She was lying on a makeshift stretcher, being carried by 2 other humans. She was still directing attacks. She was pointing at coalition positions, giving orders, coordinating the other survivors. Lieutenant Hana, the ghost, was there as well. Vel saw her only once. For a brief moment. She had shrapnel wounds across her face. One of her eyes was covered in bandages, but she was still taking shots. And those shots were still finding their targets. How? Vel whispered. How are they still fighting? Nobody had an answer. The coalition forces advanced carefully. They had overwhelming numbers. 43 humans against 3,000 soldiers. This should have been easy. This should have been over quickly. It was not. The humans fought for every inch. They fought for every rock, every crater, every piece of burned ground. When they ran out of ammunition, they threw rocks. When they ran out of rocks, they used their hands. Vel's unit was part of the force that cornered a small group of humans. Just 7 soldiers and 2 wounded who could not move. They were surrounded. They had no cover. They had almost no ammunition left. Surrender, Vel's squad leader called out. You cannot win. Stop fighting, and we will treat your wounded. The humans looked at each other. One of them, a young female, laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had already accepted death. Come and take us, she said. They came. 200 coalition soldiers against 7 humans. 83 aliens died in the assault. The humans did not surrender. They did not retreat. They did not hesitate. They fought until they were physically unable to move, and even then, even lying on the ground with fatal wounds, they tried to grab weapons. They tried to keep fighting. The last one to fall was the young female who had laughed. Vel was there when she died. She had been shot 6 times. She was lying in a pool of her own blood. But her eyes were still open. Her hand was still reaching for a knife that was just out of reach. Why? Vel asked her. He knelt beside her and looked into her eyes. Why did you not surrender? You could have lived. She looked at him. Blood bubbled from her lips when she spoke. Living is not everything, she said. Some things are worth dying for. Then she was gone. Vel stood up slowly. Around him, coalition soldiers were checking bodies, treating wounded, trying to make sense of what had just happened. 200 soldiers had attacked 7 humans, and 83 of them had died. But the battle was not over. Captain Teho was still alive. Vel found him at the center of the burned settlement. The human captain was alone. His soldiers were dead or captured. He had no ammunition. He had no weapon except a combat knife. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds. 100 coalition soldiers surrounded him, weapons raised, ready to fire. Surrender, the coalition commander ordered. It is over. Your soldiers are dead. Your colony is destroyed. There is nothing left to fight for. Teho looked at the commander. Then he looked at the soldiers surrounding him. Then he looked up at the sky, where coalition warships hung like dark clouds. He smiled. It was the same smile Vel had seen on that ridge 1 month ago. The smile of someone who knew something you did not. You think this is over? Teho said. His voice was calm, quiet, almost gentle. This is not over. This will never be over. You have killed 400 of us. But there are billions more. And now they know about you. He raised his knife. Not to attack. Just to hold it ready. Go ahead, he said. Kill me. It will not matter. For every one of us you kill, 10 more will come. For every colony you burn, 100 more will rise. You cannot break us. You can only make us angry. The coalition commander gave the order. Teho was shot 17 times. He fell to his knees, then to his face. His knife dropped from his fingers and landed in the ash, but his eyes stayed open. Even in death, even lying in the ruins of everything he had fought for, his eyes were fixed on his enemies. And in those eyes, Vel saw something that haunted him for the rest of his life: defiance. Pure, absolute defiance. The Coalition had won. They held Vorn 4. The 400 human defenders were dead or captured. By every measure, it was a victory. But it did not feel like a victory. Vel looked at the bodies. He looked at the destruction. He looked at the exhausted, terrified faces of the surviving Coalition soldiers. They had won, but at what cost? 9,000 dead, thousands more wounded, a month of horror and nightmare. And there were billions more humans out there. Billions. Word spread quickly through the galaxy. The story of Vorn 4. The story of 400 humans who had held off 12,000 aliens for a month. The story of 43 survivors who kept fighting after an orbital bombardment. Within a year, 6 species withdrew from the Coalition. They had joined to share in easy victories. They had not signed up to face humanity. The war continued. But something had changed. The Coalition no longer spoke of conquering Earth. They spoke of containing humanity, limiting their expansion, finding a way to end the war before it destroyed everyone. They had seen what humans could do, and they were afraid. The recording device sat on the table, its red light still blinking. Vel had been talking for hours. His throat was dry. His hands were shaking, but he was almost done. There was only one part of the story left to tell. Kira sat across from him, her face pale. She had not spoken in a long time. She had simply listened, her eyes growing wider with each new horror. Now she finally found her voice. If humans were so terrifying, she said quietly, how did the war end? I have read the histories. They say the Coalition won. They say Earth surrendered. Vel laughed. It was not a happy sound. The histories are written by those who want to feel safe. They tell lies to help us sleep at night. He leaned forward and looked into her eyes. The truth is very different. He took a drink of water and composed himself. This was the part of the story that still kept him awake. This was the truth that the galaxy had buried for 40 years. After Vorn 4, the war continued for 2 more years, he said. There were battles on a dozen worlds. The Coalition sent millions of soldiers to fight humanity, and the humans fought back. Always. No matter how badly they were outnumbered. No matter how hopeless the situation seemed. They never stopped fighting. He paused. But here is what the histories do not tell you. Throughout those 2 years, we were fighting volunteers, colonists, miners, teachers and farmers and engineers who picked up weapons to defend their homes. Kira frowned. What do you mean? I mean that Earth's actual military never deployed, Vel said. The soldiers we faced on Vorn 4, on every world, were not professional warriors. They were ordinary civilians. The human military, the trained soldiers, the real fighting force of Earth, they stayed home. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Why? Kira asked. Because they did not need to deploy, Vel said. The volunteers were enough. Ordinary humans, with basic training and civilian weapons, were enough to bleed the Coalition dry. The human leaders knew this. They were waiting, watching, letting their civilians fight, while their military prepared for something else. He stood up and walked to the window of the interview room. Outside, stars filled the darkness. Somewhere, out there, in a distant part of the galaxy, was Earth. A small blue world that the Coalition had tried to conquer. A world that had nearly destroyed them instead. Coalition intelligence intercepted human communications, Vel continued. Military plans, strategic documents, things we were never supposed to see. He turned back to face Kira. Do you know what we found? She shook her head. We found their real plan, their full mobilization strategy, what they intended to do if the war continued. Vel returned to his seat. His hands were shaking worse now. Earth has 8 billion humans. 8 billion. And they had a plan to arm every single one of them. Not just soldiers. Everyone. Children would be taught to fight. Old people would build weapons. Every city would become a fortress. Every road would become a trap. He closed his eyes. We calculated what a full human mobilization would mean. We ran the numbers again and again, hoping we had made a mistake. We had not. If humanity truly went to war, if they committed everything they had, the coalition would be destroyed, not weakened, not damaged, destroyed. Every species in the coalition would be fighting for survival. He opened his eyes. And it would not stop there. Humans do not forget. They do not forgive. If we pushed them to total war, they would hunt us across the galaxy. They would chase us to the ends of the universe. They would not rest until every species that had attacked them was either dead or broken. Kira was trembling now. So what happened? The humans offered peace terms, Vel said simply. They did not demand much. Return of their colonies. Payment for damages. A promise that the coalition would never attack Earth again. He laughed bitterly. It was generous. It was more than we deserved. And the coalition accepted? Within hours, Vel said. The War Council saw those numbers. They saw what humanity was capable of. And they surrendered faster than they had ever done anything in their history. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. The story was almost done. But there was one more thing he needed to tell her. One more memory that he had carried for 40 years. I saw Seung-ho again, he said. The human medic who saved the young Torani soldier in the tunnels. Kira looked up. When? 20 years after the war. I was traveling through a neutral station, and I saw him working in an interspecies hospital. Vel smiled sadly. He looked older, tired, but he was still healing people. Humans, aliens, anyone who needed help. Did you speak to him? Yes. I walked up to him and said his name. He looked at me for a long moment. I thought he might hate me. I thought he might attack me. After all, I had been his enemy. I had helped destroy his colony. Vel shook his head slowly. But he did not hate me. He smiled. A real smile. Warm and kind. He asked me if the young Torani soldier had survived. The one he had saved in the tunnels. I told him yes. I told him that soldier was my nephew now, married to my sister's daughter, that he had children of his own. His voice grew thick. Seung-ho nodded. He said he was glad. Then he asked about my scars, the ones on my arms. He asked if they had healed well. He was concerned about me, about an enemy who had tried to kill him. Kira wiped her eyes. She was crying now, though she did not seem to realize it. That is the true horror of humans, Vel said softly. They are not monsters. They are not demons. They are not mindless killing machines. They are kind. They are generous. They create art and music that makes other species weep with its beauty. They save lives. Even the lives of their enemies. He leaned forward, his voice intense. But when they decide you are their enemy, they become something else entirely, something that will crawl through fire and blood and pain and keep coming until one of you is dead. They can turn off their kindness like a light switch. And once it is off, nothing in the universe will stop them. Kira sat in silence for a long moment. Then she asked the final question, the one that had been hanging in the air since the beginning. After everything you witnessed, after everything you have told me, what do you truly think of humans? Vel considered the question carefully. He thought about Tae-ho, standing alone against 100 enemies, defiant to the last breath. He thought about Yuna, directing attacks even as she bled out on a stretcher. He thought about Hyun-woo, fighting for 3 days with a bone sticking out of his arm. He thought about Hana, the ghost, killing from the shadows with cold precision. And he thought about Seung-ho, kind, gentle Seung-ho, who had saved an enemy's life simply because he was a medic and the enemy was hurt. There is a human phrase, Vel said finally. Something their soldiers say to each other before battle. See you on the other side. What does it mean? It means they will meet again after death. It means they are not afraid to die. It means death is just another place, and they expect their friends to be there waiting for them. Vel stood up slowly. His old bones ached, his scars throbbed. But his mind was clear. The galaxy has many warrior species, he said. Many proud races who think they understand war. But only one species treats battle as a family gathering, where some members arrive late. Only one species looks at death and sees a reunion. He walked to the door of the interview room and paused with his hand on the handle. That is why we do not speak of Earth, he said quietly. That is why we will never provoke them again. Not because we cannot defeat them. Not because they are stronger than us, or smarter than us, or more numerous than us. He turned and looked at Kira one last time. We do not speak of Earth because they are not afraid. Of anything. Not pain. Not death. Not even us. He opened the door. And that is the most terrifying thing in the universe. He stepped through the door and walked away, leaving Kira alone in the white room with her recording device, and her notes, and her new understanding of why the galaxy had learned to fear a small blue world on the edge of known space. Outside, the stars continued to burn. And somewhere among them, humanity continued to live, and laugh, and love, and wait. Always waiting. For the next enemy foolish enough to test them. The end.